My son called me on a Tuesday afternoon in early December, which should have been my first sign that something was off. He never calls on Tuesdays. He texts, usually something short. "How are you, Mum?" or a photo of the dog. A phone call meant he needed something, or he was working up to something, and I'd been his mother long enough to know the difference. "I need to talk to you about Christmas," he said. I set down the dish towel I was holding. "Okay. Audra and I have been talking." A pause. "We're doing something different this year." I waited. "We're hosting a dinner for her clients. Some of them are in from out of town and they don't have anywhere to go, and it's a big deal for the firm. For us. You understand?" "Of course," I said. "Should I bring the green bean casserole or the sweet potato?" "Mum." Another pause, longer this time. "It's going to be a formal dinner. Catered. Audra's been planning it for months. She wants it to be a certain kind of thing." I understood then. I just needed him to say it. "We don't think it would be the right fit," he said finally. "You're cooking. It's wonderful, Mum. We all love it, but these are corporate clients. It needs to be more sophisticated than what we usually do for the holidays." I stood in my kitchen for a moment after we hung up. The pot of soup on the stove was still simmering. The Christmas cards I'd been addressing were fanned out on the table. I'd already bought the butter for the shortbread cookies I make every year, the ones my grandchildren call Grammy's cookies, the ones my son used to eat 4 of before dinner when he thought I wasn't looking. I put the lid on the soup. I went back to the cards, and I thought about what I was going to do with the next 4 weeks. His name is Connor. He's 43 years old, and he works in commercial real estate, which is how he met Audra. She's sharp and driven, and she comes from money in a way that Connor never did. Not badly, just differently. They've been married 11 years. They have 2 daughters, Lily and Bree, who are 9 and 6, and who call me Grammy, and who ask every single Christmas if we can make cookies together. For the last 6 years, Christmas has been at their house in Natherville. I drive the 2 hours from Rockford. I bring the food I'd been making since Connor was small. The green bean casserole, the sweet potato dish with the brown sugar and pecans, the shortbread, the cranberry sauce made from scratch, because Connor once told me the canned stuff made him sad. I sleep in their guest room. I wake up early and start the coffee, and usually find Lily already downstairs sitting on the floor by the tree. It was never fancy. It was just ours. I don't know exactly when Audra started to find it insufficient. I noticed small things over the past few years. A comment about the casserole dish I used, how it didn't match the new china, a remark about my shortbread being very home style. The way she'd arranged the dining room one year with a centerpiece that left no room for the dishes I'd brought, so we served everything buffet style from the kitchen counter, while her family's contributions sat at the table. I told myself it didn't mean anything. People have different styles. Audra wasn't a bad person. She just wanted things a certain way. But my cooking, my Christmas cooking, that was 30 years of Christmas mornings and church potlucks and neighbour funerals and my son's birthday cakes and the smell of nutmeg in November. That wasn't just food. I didn't call him back that week. I needed time to think without the feeling of having to reassure him that I was fine, because I wasn't sure yet if I was. My neighbour Pam came over that Thursday for coffee the way she does most Thursdays. She's been my neighbour for 22 years, since before her husband passed, since before my husband Raymond passed, since our kids were in middle school and used to cut through each other's yards. I told her what Connor had said. She set her mug down slowly. He said your cooking isn't sophisticated enough. He said the dinner needed to be a certain kind of thing, which means your cooking isn't sophisticated enough. I suppose it does. She was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? And that was the question, wasn't it? I could spend Christmas alone. I could drive to my sister's in Milwaukee, which I hadn't done since Raymond died because it felt like admitting something I wasn't ready to admit. I could fly to my daughter Beverly, and then I stopped myself because that name is taken. I could call my cousin in Phoenix. Or, I think I'm going to host my own Christmas dinner, I said. Pam looked at me. Here? Here. She picked her mug back up. Who are you inviting? I didn't know yet, but I had 4 weeks to figure it out. The first person I thought of was my friend Rosalind from church. She's 71, widowed 3 years ago, and her only son lives in Portland. They're close, but he couldn't afford to fly her out this year. She'd told me in passing one Sunday, the way you say things in passing when you don't want to make them a big deal. I called her that evening. I'm hosting Christmas dinner, I told her. I'd love for you to come. There was a brief silence. Just me. Well, I'm still building the guest list. She laughed, and it was a real laugh, surprised and a little relieved. I'll bring pie, she said. The second call I made was to my former colleague Ted, who retired the same year I did from the school district where we'd both worked. Me as an administrative assistant, him as the high school's shop teacher. His wife passed 2 summers ago, and his kids are scattered across the country, and December had been hard for him. I knew because he'd mentioned it once, and then looked embarrassed for mentioning it, the way men of a certain age do when they let something slip. Dinner at my place, I told him. Christmas Day, noon. You don't have to do that, he said. I know I don't. Another pause. Should I bring anything? Just yourself. Then I called the ESL coordinator at the public library, a woman named Grace who I'd volunteered with for 2 years before my knee started bothering me. I explained what I was doing and asked if she knew of any international students or newcomers who might not have anywhere to go for the holiday. She said she'd make some calls. 2 days later, she called back with 3 names. A young woman named Yuna from South Korea doing her master's at the university, a Sudanese family, a father and his teenage son, who had arrived in Rockford 6 months ago through a resettlement program, and an older gentleman from the Philippines named Rodrigo, who had been in the city for 2 years, but still struggled to feel at home here, especially around the holidays when everything felt designed for people who already belong somewhere. Do you have room? Grace asked. I'll make room, I said. My house has 3 bedrooms and a dining room that fits 8 around the table if you pull it out all the way. I went to the church thrift store and bought 4 folding chairs. I borrowed 2 card tables from Pam. I set up the dining room with the good tablecloth and the card tables in the living room, and I made it look intentional, the way you do when you don't have enough space, but you're determined not to let that be the story of the evening. I started cooking 3 days before. The shortbread first because it keeps, and because making it felt like the right way to begin, like planting a flag. I pressed each cookie out with the star cutter that Raymond gave me our first married Christmas, the one where we were so broke we each had a $10 limit on gifts, and he'd gone to 5 different stores to find it. I arranged them on parchment paper and let them cool on the rack, and then I packed them in the tin with the red lid that's been in this kitchen for over 20 years. Then the green bean casserole, then the sweet potato dish. I made the cranberry sauce 2 days out, letting it set in the refrigerator until it was just the right consistency. Not too stiff, not too loose, with the orange zest that Connor used to pick out as a kid, and then started requesting when he was in college. I made 2 pans of cornbread stuffing and a pot of mashed potatoes that I kept warm in the slow cooker. I bought a 12-pound turkey from the butcher on Main Street, the one I've gone to for 15 years, and I dry brined it 2 days ahead with salt and herbs and butter, worked under the skin. Pam came over Christmas Eve to help me set the tables. She brought her good candlesticks because mine had melted at the base from years of use. We arranged everything and stood back and looked at it. It's lovely, she said. It was, not sophisticated, but lovely. That night I lay awake for a while thinking about Connor. I wondered what his dining room looked like. I wondered if Lily and Bree had asked where Grammy was. I wondered if Audra's catered dinner had the kind of table where children were welcome, or the kind where they ate separately in another room, which I've always thought was its own kind of statement about what you value. I didn't let myself stay in that wondering too long. I had a turkey to put in the oven at 7 in the morning. They started arriving at 11:30. Rosalind came first with a beautiful lattice-top apple pie and a bottle of sparkling cider. She walked in and looked at the tables and the candles and the smell of the turkey, and she said, "Oh, Dawn, this is wonderful." Just like that. Like she meant all of it. Ted came next, in a clean flannel shirt, with a grocery store bouquet of carnations that he held out to me at the door, with such genuine awkwardness that I wanted to hug him on the spot. I put the flowers in the blue vase on the windowsill, and they looked exactly right there. Una arrived with her roommate, a quiet American girl named Jess, who Una had hesitantly asked if she could bring. Her roommate's family was in Georgia, and she hadn't been able to get home. Of course, I'd said when Una called to ask, the more the better. Una had made japchae, glass noodles with vegetables and beef, and she carried it in a careful covered dish with both hands. I told her it looked beautiful. She smiled in that way people smile when they're both proud and slightly nervous, and I thought about how much courage it takes to bring your own food to a stranger's table. Ibrahim and his son Tariq arrived in a taxi. Ibrahim was tall and quiet with careful, watchful eyes, and Tariq was 15 and looked the way 15-year-olds look when they've been told to behave somewhere unfamiliar, stiff-shouldered, eyes moving around the room, trying to read the situation. I shook Ibrahim's hand and then turned to Tariq and said, "I hear you've been in Rockford since June. What do you think of the winters?" He blinked. "Then they are very cold." "They're very cold," I agreed. "Wait until February." Something in his shoulders dropped just slightly. Good enough. Rodrigo came last, with a dish of bibinka, a Filipino rice cake, warm and wrapped in foil. He was in his early 70s and wore a pressed button-down shirt and explained the dish to me in careful English. What was in it, how his wife used to make it, how he'd tried to replicate it from memory. "I hope it is okay," he said. "It's more than okay," I said. "Tell me about your wife." He looked at me for a moment, like he hadn't expected that. Then he smiled, really smiled, and followed me into the kitchen. We ate for almost 2 hours. I hadn't planned it that way. I'd thought we'd eat, and it would be pleasant, and then people would politely go home. But the table, both tables, had something happen to them that I can only describe as filling up, not just with food, with conversation that moved around and looped back and crossed languages and generations. Rosalind and Rodrigo discovered they both had grandchildren who played soccer. Ted taught Tariq 3 different card tricks during a lull between courses, and Tariq taught him something in return that involved snapping, which I did not understand, but which made everyone at the card table laugh. Una's japchae was gone within 20 minutes. I wrote that down mentally as something to remember. Jess, the roommate from Georgia, started telling a story about her grandmother's biscuit recipe and ended up in my kitchen with me after dinner, and I showed her how I do my shortbread, and she told me her grandmother did something similar with the butter, worked it cold, not soft, and we stood there comparing notes like we'd known each other for years. The turkey came out right. I want to say that because the comment about my cooking had lodged itself somewhere in me that I hadn't fully acknowledged, and there was a specific satisfaction in watching people reach for seconds and thirds. Rodrigo had 2 full plates. Ted asked if he could take some home. Rosalind said it was the best turkey she'd had since her husband was alive, which I knew was a big thing for her to say, and I squeezed her hand across the table. My phone rang at 3:15. I almost didn't answer it. I was in the middle of cutting the apple pie, and the room was loud and warm, and I didn't want to step away from any of it, but I saw Connor's name, and I stepped into the hallway. Mum, his voice was tight, we have a situation. What's wrong? The caterer, he exhaled. They got the order wrong, like significantly wrong. The entree they sent, it's not what we ordered. And two of Audra's biggest clients are vegetarian, and the backup dish has shellfish in it, and the backup dish has shellfish in it. And he stopped. Are you home? Yes. Do you have food? Could we? Another pause. The girls keep asking for Grammy's cookies. I leaned against the wall. In the other room I could hear Tariq laughing at something Ted had said. I could hear Rosalind's voice, clear and warm. I could smell the pie. Connor, I said, I have a house full of guests. Silence. You're welcome to come, I said. You and Audra and the girls. There's room. There's more than enough food, but I can't leave my guests to come cook for your dinner party. The silence stretched. Okay, he said finally. His voice was different now. Smaller, I understand. Merry Christmas, Connor. Merry Christmas, Mom. I went back to cut the pie. Rosalind was the last to leave, around 6 o'clock. She stood at my front door, in her coat with the leftover pie tin in one hand, and she looked at me and said, Same time next year. I laughed. Same time next year. After she left, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea while the candles burned down. The dishes were done. Ted had insisted wouldn't hear otherwise, had rolled up his flannel sleeves and done them while I put the leftovers away. The folding chairs were leaned against the wall. The flowers were still on the windowsill. I thought about Connor's call. I didn't feel triumph exactly. I felt something quieter than that. A kind of settling, like when a picture frame that's been slightly crooked for so long you've stopped noticing finally gets straightened. He called again the following Tuesday. This time his voice was different, careful, like someone who has thought about what he wants to say and still isn't entirely sure how to say it. I think we handled it wrong, he said. I handled it wrong. I should have talked to you differently. I should have. He stopped. I'm sorry, Mum. I let the apology sit for a moment, not because I wanted him to suffer, because I wanted it to be real, and sometimes you have to give real things space. Thank you for saying that, I said. How was your Christmas? He asked, and I could tell he meant it. It was really good, I said. It was one of the best ones I've had in a while, actually. Another pause. The girls missed you. I miss them too. Tell them Grammy will make cookies at New Year's. We can mail them down if you... We'll drive up, he said quickly. We'll come to you. I've been cooking for 63 years. I made my first pie at 9 years old with my grandmother standing beside me, her hands over mine on the rolling pin. I cooked my way through a marriage and a family and a career and grief and recovery and all the ordinary, extraordinary years in between. I have never once cooked something that didn't have love in it. That's not a boast, it's just the truth. Someone decided once that love needed to be sophisticated to count, that the way I set a table, the dishes I make, the shortbread pressed into stars, wasn't enough for a certain kind of room. I used to let that kind of judgment sit in me like a stone. I don't anymore. That Christmas I had 9 people around my tables who came in as strangers and left as something closer to friends, and not one of them cared about the card tables or the mismatched chairs, or whether the turkey was prepared by a catering company with a 5-star review. They cared that there was room for them. They cared that someone had made the call. I was the one who made the call. And I would do it again every year for the rest of my life. I still think about that Tuesday phone call, not with bitterness, I'm past that, but the way you think about a moment that turned out to me more than it seemed at the time. Connor didn't call me to be cruel. I know that. He called because he'd let someone else's definition of what was good enough become his own, and he didn't even notice when that happened. That's the quiet danger of trying to impress people who will never be fully impressed. You start making cuts. First the things that seem small, then the things that aren't small at all. Then you're standing in a catered dining room on Christmas Day with the wrong entree and two vegetarian clients and your daughters asking where Grammy is. And you can't quite trace back the series of decisions that got you there. What I did that December wasn't complicated. I picked up the phone. I made room at the table. I cooked the food I've always cooked, the food that came from my grandmother's hands into mine, and I put it in front of people who were grateful to have somewhere warm to sit. That's all. But doing that thing, that ordinary, unspectacular thing, required me to decide that my judgment about what mattered was worth trusting, not Audra's, not anyone else's, mine. I think about Rodrigo, who came in with his covered dish of bebinca and told me about his wife, with his eyes full of something I recognized. I think about Tariq, 15 years old in a city that was still foreign to him, shoulders stiff at my door, and how they dropped just slightly when I treated him like a person and not a guest who needed to be managed. I think about Jess standing in my kitchen talking about her grandmother's biscuits, and how two women who had never met found common ground in the way cold butter behaves under your hands. None of that was sophisticated. All of it was real. There's something I've learned that I couldn't have put into words when I was younger, something that only comes from living long enough to watch cause and effect play out over years. How you treat people when it costs you nothing reveals very little. What reveals everything is how you treat people when it costs you something. When Connor called at 3:15 and I said I couldn't leave my guests, that cost me something. It cost me the instinct I'd spent 40 years following, the one that says a mother drops everything. I chose differently. Not out of spite, out of the understanding that this time the right thing and the easy thing were not the same. Connor said he was sorry. I believed him. That matters. People who can look at their own choices honestly and say, I handled that wrong. That takes something real. It takes more than most people give themselves credit for. I've been thinking lately that the life that holds together under pressure isn't built from big dramatic gestures. It's built from the small decisions made in ordinary moments, whether to call the person you know is going to be alone, whether to hold your ground quietly, whether to keep the shortbread recipe even when someone calls it unsophisticated, whether to make room at the table even when the table is a card table borrowed from your neighbor. My grandmother used to say that the way you feed people is the way you love them. I believe that. I have always believed that, and I will not apologize for it.